Part 1. I'm beginning to wonder if the bit is a way for Toby to vent some of his own anxiety about the development process of Deltarune. Chapter 1 came out when I was a freshman in high school, Chapter 2 when I was a senior, and Chapters 3 and 4 in between my second and third year of college. So if I have to guess, he's trying to pick up the pace with getting it complete, especially with the 2026 release window for Chapter 5 being confirmed. Now, I'm not trying to rush Toby Fox, I wouldn't do that if my life depended on it, but I do think it's interesting to see how such a long wait time affects people's relationship with a story. How do these massive gaps in time affect the experience? For me, there were some plot points I had forgotten as I hadn't thought all that much about Deltarune after Chapter 2, and also didn't bother to catch up, but that's more on me. Things like Dessa's disappearance suddenly became way more relevant, and I did enjoy going back and relearning the lore, it just made me feel lost sometimes, and I honestly can't expect everyone to be as locked into the Deltarune lore as some people are. Then again, probably our fault. But aside from forgetting things, I think the 4-year gap did have an impact on how certain elements of the story could be consumed, such as the Roaring Night reveal. The night was hinted at sparingly in Chapter 1 and 2, and while their reveal is certainly a big deal no matter how you slice it, having 7 years of build-up behind them made it even more of a holy shit kind of moment. When in actuality, the Knight really only showed up less than halfway through the story. Pretty reasonable for a main villain to come in, but not 7 years of build-up insane. Tenna also saw tons of fan designs and concepts due to the wait, giving people all kinds of expectations as to what he could end up like. Expectations like these can be hard to beat, but this is Toby Fox we're talking about. Now, I don't think Toby is trying to optimize the chapter release format to keep people's attention. What I mean is that he's not adding certain twists or plot points so people are hooked for the next chapter and don't get bored. Yeah, those things are present, but I think they're naturally part of the story. And besides, he's Toby Fox. People know he's good for it. And the format itself means each chapter is going to have something interesting in it, even if they aren't necessarily meant to be dropped at this rate. Unlike weekly manga.
They asked, who would win in a fight between Satoru Gojo and Gear 5 Luffy? Luffy's been alive my entire life.
If there's one thing One Piece is famous for, it's being long. Not just in terms of story length, but also publication. And when your story is stretched out that far, every reveal becomes more impactful. You could probably catch up in a couple months, and you'd be seeing characters being revealed and plot points and arcs being delivered on way quicker than people who've spent years reading weekly. There were 7 years in between Rock's first being mentioned and him finally being shown, and that all took place over just the span of 2.5 arcs. It also just makes things go way slower, obviously. Reading Oda's flashbacks when an arc is done is really cool, but reading them weekly can honestly get really annoying when we constantly cut away in the middle of a heated moment, sometimes multiple times an arc. But at least One Piece is pretty consistent with its release schedule. Part 3. The Boat. If you don't know about the Boat from Berserk, it's an arc in between Guts sailing out to Elfhelm to heal Casca, his main goal of the entire manga, and them reaching the island. The reason it's bemoaned is because it took the better part of a decade to get done. I don't know exactly why it ended up like this. I've heard some theories, but I don't know for sure. But I do know that drawing is hard, and a drawing you spent hours on will probably only be read for a few seconds in the final product. Either way, these hiatuses turn what was meant to be a cool action-focused side arc into a massive slog. But that experience was non-existent for me when I read the arc. I'm grateful for that, but I also can't imagine what it would be like to wait that long to see Casca healed. Like with Deltarune and One Piece, I imagine it's way more impactful. It would almost be unreal to see something that was that far off in the future finally come to fruition. I imagine that we're going to get a similar experience when we actually find out what the One Piece is and get to it. If there's one thing I have to give One Piece credit for, it's that all the characters it's been building up over the past 30 years in publication have actually begun to be delivered on. That can be another issue with long wait times for stories. You can count your eggs before they hatch, and declare the story good before they come crashing down. But was that story still good at that point? We've seen stories go to shit, but that doesn't remove the good times we've had with them. I still think positively of My Villain Academia, even if later chapters of My Hero would go on to invalidate a lot of what was set up. And to be clear, it's not like My Hero couldn't live up to what it was setting up. Well, that's not entirely true, but in many ways, it just didn't deliver what we thought it would. I have to wonder to what extent these stories are intended to be produced weekly. Something like Deltarune, I don't believe, tries to keep viewer attention over the span of 7 years, but in the hyper-competitive world of manga, you almost have to. How does that affect the way that authors write their stories? And how does that affect the way that viewers consume those stories and experience them? I think it's all really interesting.